Hi guys, it's Jessie with FoodNet Meals on Wheels again. I'm back with another tasty recipe for you guys to try. And today we're going to be making roasted cauliflower nachos. So if you're a big nachos fan and like something with a little bit of melted cheese, this is perfect because you get all the flavors from the nachos that you would normally look for, but it's a lot healthier because the base is cauliflower instead of chips. So today we're going to be using cauliflower, a red onion, some grape or cherry tomatoes, some black beans from a can, a jalapeno, only if you'd like. If you don't like spices, feel free to leave this out. Some low-fat cheese. You could do cheddar or mozzarella, either works. We're going to need olive oil or some kind of oil spray. And then, as always, salt and pepper for a little bit of seasoning. And then to season, we're going to use chili powder, red pepper, which is a little bit spicier. So again, if you don't like spicy, I would err on the side of leaving out those spices. And then garlic powder. So today's recipe is going to require our toaster oven again. You can also use the regular oven if you don't have a toaster oven. So go ahead and preheat to 425. All right, so while that's preheating, we can go ahead and spray our baking pan. And that'll just keep it from sticking. So the highlighted ingredients in today's recipe are our cauliflower and then the low-fat dairy, which is in the form of mozzarella or cheddar cheese. I do want to note also that the beans are really high in fiber, so you can't go wrong there. And then we're also using grape tomatoes, which are high in vitamin C, as we've talked about before, and a really great antioxidant. So in terms of cauliflower is a great vegetable because not only is it relatively cheap, you can get a whole head at Wegmans for a little over $2. It's also really hardy, so it lasts a long time in the fridge, so it'll stay good if you're not going to use it right away. Cauliflower, which we haven't talked about previously, is really high in fiber, and we've also talked about fiber being good for your GI tract. It prevents constipation. It's good for preventing diverticulitis, so fiber is really good for your gut all around. But it also has something called sulforaphane, which is a plant chemical related to the sulfur in cruciferous vegetables. So any broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, they're all part of the cruciferous vegetable family. And this sulfur compound has been shown to play a role in diabetes prevention as well as cancer risk reduction. So the research on this compound called sulforaphane has been really positive. So it's a good sign for cauliflower eaters. In addition, we know that the fiber in cauliflower is really important for preventing heart disease, lowering cholesterol, and it's really high in antioxidants and vitamin C. So can't go wrong with cauliflower. And then we're going to also be using low-fat dairy today, and we've talked about low-fat dairy before, but just to refresh your memory, it's really important for bone health and bone metabolism. And then dairy is also fortified with vitamin D, which is really important for your mental health as well, but also plays a role in bone maintenance and essentially all of your organs. So to get started, I'm going to do a little demonstration on how to cut cauliflower. I know a lot of people aren't used to using cauliflower, and it's a little bit of an exotic vegetable if you tend to stay away from the more cruciferous vegetables. So it's actually okay to cut cauliflower before you wash it, because once you cut it, it opens up more of the surface area, so you'll be able to wash it better once it's cut. So you're going to want to start by just cutting it right in half down the middle. So we have two halves, and we'll only really need one half today, so you can keep the other half in the fridge in a bag or a container. And then you can see all of the different little florets. So there's like a big core right here, and you're going to want to cut the florets off of the main core. So just gently and really carefully cut them off, and then pull off these really beautiful florets of cauliflower. And then another layer, get a little deeper. And you can eat the stems of the cauliflower, which is the white part, but it's a little more fibrous and pretty hardy, so I recommend only using up until about here. But if you're a little more adventurous, you can go for it. So now I'm going to take these pieces and wash them just to get anything off that wasn't accessible before. All right, so our recipe calls for about 2.5 cups sliced in pretty thin slices. So if you want to make the cauliflower taste a little bit more like a chip, because we're making the nachos, you can cut it into these thin little pieces, even smaller than 1/2 inch if you'd like, and then just put it into our bowl. So I'm going to do that for all of the florets, and this way when it cooks, it, instead of getting soft, it'll get nice and crispy. And just be really careful with your fingers when you're doing this. Alright, so we're almost there. And the next thing we're going to do is just toss this with some olive oil. Olive oil is also really great for you. It's really high in omega-3s and a lot of different fatty acids that are essential in your body. So instead of using butter, it's definitely a great alternative for an oil or fat. So instead of using olive oil, I'm going to use the avocado oil spray just because it'll distribute better. But if you're using olive oil, you'll want to drizzle 1 tablespoon pretty evenly around. So I'll just spray and then do a little toss. And then you'll want to season it. The recipe calls for 1/2 teaspoon of a bunch of seasonings. I like to just eyeball seasonings. The only one you should really watch out for is the pepper if you're not going for something super spicy. And then of course, go easy on the salt because you never want to use too much salt. And then chili powder is a really nice kind of nacho flavor that you'll want to make sure you get in there. And then last, we're going to use some black pepper. So cauliflower on its own has a pretty bland flavor, which makes it really nice for cooking with different seasonings. So it just takes on the flavor of whatever you cook with it. So we're going to dump this onto the pan and space them out pretty well so they all have access to that heat so they can get nice and crispy. And then we're going to put this in the oven for 20 minutes. All right. So next up, we can clear off our cutting board. And we're going to go ahead and cut up some cherry tomatoes. When you're cutting tomatoes, you might want to use a different knife. Often a serrated knife works best, just because that way it won't smush the tomato. So I'm going to cut them into quarters. And the recipe calls for 1/3 cup of cherry tomatoes. And again, if you're shopping at the farmer's market or have those farmer's market coupons, you can definitely get some cauliflower, onion, jalapeno, or even some tomatoes down at the farmer's market. And it's a great way to support the local economy. So there's our third of a cup of tomatoes. And then we're also going to be using black beans. So you're going to need a quarter of a cup of black beans. I already opened the container top, but we're also going to need to wash off the beans because they come in this dark liquid. So I'm going to go dump the liquid and then rinse them to kind of clean them off. Alright. So we'll take our third of a cup, or quarter of a cup. Oops. And we can just dump that right into the bowl we're going to be using. Alright. And then while we wait, we can also cut up the onion. So I'll show you how to cut an onion. So first you'll want to cut it right in half down the center. And we're definitely only going to need one half, so you can store the other. And then you want to just peel off that outer layer that feels kind of papery, because it doesn't taste good and it has kind of a weird texture. So it comes off pretty easily, and then you can just throw this layer away or compost. All right. So then I'm going to cut it in half again because I think we'll need less than a quarter. All right. So if you're going to do some minced onion, the best way to go about doing this is there's a little kind of butt right here where it all grew out of, and you're going to want to cut around that. So don't cut all the way through, but just a little, almost all the way to the end, into really thin strips. And again, being really careful with your fingers. And then we're going to go from the side almost all the way to the end again, but not quite. So almost all the way to that butt. And so it should still stay in just one piece. That's what you want. And then we're going to go down. So it's 3 different directions that you're cutting in. And this just makes the onion cut into nice little dices. Perfect. Alright, so there we have definitely more than a quarter of a cup, but you can always use more onion. And then we can save the rest for a different recipe. And then the last thing we're going to do is cut up our jalapeno. So to cut up the jalapeno, you'll want to just cut off the top first. And then cut it down the middle. And then if you like the seeds and you want it to be a little spicier, keep the seeds in there and just cut it into really thin slices. And I can hear that cauliflower roasting really nicely. We can throw this top away. And then if you don't want the seeds, you can take your knife and really gently pull out this membrane that has all the seeds in it. And this can just get thrown away. And then scrape out any extra seeds. And then you can just use the flesh and it'll be a little bit less spicy. And I think that'll be just enough. Alright, so we are all set to go as soon as the cauliflower is ready. I'm going to put it on pause and then come back when it's done and I'll show you how to do the rest. Alright, so our 20 minutes is up, so our cauliflower should be looking pretty roasted. And you can see looking pretty brown, which is just what we'd like. For the next part, we're going to kind of clump all of the cauliflower together in the middle of the pan, kind of like you would do for nachos. And then we'll take our beans and kind of sprinkle them over the cauliflower. And then we'll also take our jalapenos and put these on now, only as much as you'd like. And then lastly, we're going to need a 1/4 cup of cheese. So all right, and then you're also going to want to distribute that evenly on the top. All right, and then these are going to go back into the oven for about 6 or 7 more minutes until the beans are cooked and the cheese is melted, and then we'll talk with the rest of our ingredients. All right, so our nachos have been in there for another 6.5 minutes, so I'm going to take them out. And the cheese should be melted by now, and it is, and the beans look cooked. So the last thing we have to do is sprinkle on the rest of our ingredients, just evenly over the top. And if you have fresh cilantro, that'd be great to sprinkle on top too, and even a little diced up avocado would be really nice. So now we have our cauliflower nachos, and it's a much healthier alternative than regular nachos with all of the same great flavors. All right, thanks for watching, guys, and if you have any suggestions or ideas or questions, feel free to comment your ideas and questions, and I would be happy to cook anything else or do some more demos or talk about nutrition. So thanks so much for watching, and have a great day.